Hi everyone, Richard here at Calvin Wazoo, bringing you another video, and I hope to start a thread here. I know it's kind of late in the month, but June is Pride Month, and I'm kind of surprised that someone hasn't started a thread regarding LGBTQ musicians, musical artists, etc., both from the past and in the present. So I want to get this thread going, and I hope some people will join in. Now, the selections that I have, and there's no rules, okay? So, show at least, five maybe, but show as many as you want and talk about them as much as you want. The idea is to, recognize LGBTQ artists both in the music industry. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show some records that are really focused on not, they're not straight people being allies, which is just perfectly fine, if that's what you want to show and talk about how they are allies, although you might open yourself up to some criticism because there are people in the music industry who are perceived to be allies and they're really not. And then also, I'm not going to, for example, show David Bowie, who supposedly went through a bisexual situation or whatever. I'm going hardcore, gay, queer, gender nonconforming. So let's get started here. And the first band I want to show here is Placebo. And Brian Molko is definitely, your gender nonconforming. It's a great record, this particular record here. Great driving song, hit song with Nancy Boy. In the even more punk than perhaps Placebo is going to be the Tom Robinson Band. Tom Robinson, being out queer, this is a Harvest label. And the Tom Robinson Band, when they were in their punk phase, were, definitely very in your face. The songs were very socially aware. And then he also had, he had the song that's on here, Glad to Be Gay. So one of the very early pioneers of the gay voice in punk music. We went into some kind of 80s pop afterwards, which I'm not a fan of that. All right, then there is Pansy Division, and I have Deflowered. They have several releases. This was really, really important. It's kind of a silly album. The lyrics are salacious and they're just fun. But what was really important about this album when it came out in, I'm trying to think, 1990 something, early 90s perhaps. Boy, I should have been better prepared with this. But the thing was, all right, the AIDS epidemic, started in the 80s, but the casualties really hit the peak during the 90s. And there was still a lot of shame attached to being HIV positive. There was no medication to effectively control it. The medications that they were prescribing were actually killing people. Remember things like AZT. Eventually, toward the end of the 90s, that's when they developed the protease inhibitors, which took a huge leap in transitioning full-blown AIDS from an absolute death sentence into moving it into a manageable medical condition and into the situation we are now. But there was no information about it at the time. And we had to supply our own information. We had to get educated because the government wasn't going to do it for us. Even with, the Clintons in office, there really was not a lot of help. And then, of course, when AIDS started in the 80s with the Reagan administration, completely ignored. Tourette, I hate saying his name, but Tourette was to COVID as to Reagan was to AIDS. It was just a non-response and pretending that it didn't exist. And what was important about Pansy Division is they included information with their insert about safe sex, about AIDS, how to protect yourself. And this was all, you weren't going to get this information, anywhere else because the government wasn't going to be handing it out. There was so much stigma. I knew people who died of AIDS, and when their obituaries ran in the newspaper, they would say something like died of a long illness, or you ended up learning the diseases that they would identify as the cause of death, when in fact, it was AIDS. It was toxoplasmosis, or, it was Kaposi sarcoma, something like that, which we knew meant that they had AIDS. So it was a tough period. So that's why Pansy Division, in spite of their silliness with a lot of their music, was really important at the time. I'm going to show, in classical music, I'm going to show the switched on Bach because Walter Carlos transitioned to become Wendy Carlos. And, if some of you got soundtracks to films like A Clockwork Orange, and there were some others that she did, those would be, valid things to show. I got both the standing and the seated Bach. But yeah, so Walter Carlos became Wendy Carlos. Then there's also Anthony Hagerty, who also made the full transition. This isn't Anthony, this is a Japanese performance artist that was on the cover with the record, with their record. But yeah, he eventually, by 2016, made the full transition and adopted the pronoun she, and is now known as Noni, and became very radicalized in terms of, she was saying that she made that decision because she could see that by staying on the fence, she was not saying anything to the negative politics and to the lot of misinformation and disinformation that was being spread around. Some other more recent artists include, Will Toledo of Car Seat Headrest. Much of his early material is very focused on, being a gay teenager and growing up and dealing with teenage issues with the added elements of both being gay and dealing with depression thrown into the mix. Amazing. I'm going to be doing more videos about Car Seat Headrest because I seriously believe Car Seat Headrest and Will Toledo are among the most innovative pop noise, especially in noise pop, but just pop in general, music that has been coming along. Another recent one is Troye Sivan, and he really came out strong with this early album of his. I'm trying to remember if it was actually his debut, but Blue Neighborhood, which is a concept album about growing up gay and being in love with someone who was still very closeted and with an abusive parent. So really, this is more R&B, modern white boy R&B, but a very, very strong album and touching story. Then, of course, in the early 2000s, we had Scissor Sister. So, we've got the joke with animatronics with Scissor Sister is that she, while everybody in the band slept with men, she was the only, straight person. But Jake Shears, famous, the famous lead vocalist. This is a really strong. I believe this was their debut. And then is this music on? Yeah, this is a music on vinyl. I've seen Scissor Sister 3 times. It's always been a really great show. I wish they were still together and making music. Someone who's a little more obscure is going to be John Grant. And this is the album Gray Tickles Black Pressure. It's on some very nice, this lavender vinyl and then this orange vinyl. So little more obscure perhaps, I think, and kind of a very poetic singer-songwriter who it's actually been a while since I listened to it. I'll have to give it another spin. But yeah, it's a different style of pop music if it's that. So there's lots of examples that you could use from some very big 1970s artists, and then there are other. I mean, I would have Judas Priest as an example if I had one of their records, and there are so many others who had a significant member of the band who was always on the fence, but then came out later because they did realize the political power behind coming out and being open in the public. Because once you do that, there's no going back and there's no taking it back with anybody else. So yeah, let's see if we can get this thread going. I'll hashtag it, or something like, LGBTQ thread for Pride Month, June, because we remember, Stonewall in 1969 was in June, and, the queerest and the most gender nonconforming you can find, even the better, and especially among non-white artists, because these were the people who, kicked the doors down during the Stonewall Rebellion. So, yeah, let's go with this. Wave your flag, show us your stuff, and I'll be looking for them here in the VC. And please remember to pray for the people inside your head, for they won't be there when you're dead.